all here tonight. I will ask everybody to kindly silence your phones if you do have your phones on you. I would also point out that our emergency exits are behind me, out this door up the stairs, and then out that door that you just came through. That being said, I'd like to bring up Tim Murphy. He is a first-term trustee and also a brand-new grandfather, and he will be introducing our speakers tonight. So thank you all.
Hi, everybody. I actually have 3 grandchildren. I had one born last week, so a little experience. The library and the Board of Trustees decided several months ago to organize this series because we know that so many people have questions and concerns about Alzheimer's disease. Probably many of you in this room have some personal experience. My mother had Alzheimer's disease, my uncle had Alzheimer's disease, and certainly my siblings and I are all concerned and trying to learn as much as we can about it. I'm also participating in the Registry at Butler Hospital that Dr. Castelluccio will talk about.
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
I'm sorry, I'll try to speak a little bit louder for people in the back. It's great to see so many people here tonight. Thank you for coming out. We hope that this series will provide a lot of useful information about research and prevention and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. At the end of tonight's lecture, in question and answer period, we ask that you fill out a brief survey to give your comments about tonight's program. Our speaker tonight is Brian Castelluccio, a postdoctoral fellow in clinical neuropsychology in the Brown University Clinical Psychology Consortium. Dr. Castelluccio completed his PhD in clinical psychology with a focus on neuropsychology at the University of Connecticut. He currently conducts neuropsychological assessments at Butler Hospital, primarily serving in an inpatient consultation capacity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Castelluccio.
Well, thank you everyone for having me to this beautiful, beautiful library. I will attempt to project to my friends in the back. Can everyone hear me at this volume? Okay. If I fade, keep me energized. So we are going to try to cover a lot of ground today because I think the audience has a wide range of interests in this broad topic of cognitive aging. We want to hit the high points, but also take time at the end to address specific questions that you all have come here with. I do want to just note I am a clinician, but I'm not your clinician. So if there are particular questions that apply to a particular situation, I won't weigh in with specific clinical advice, but I'd be happy to answer general questions about general topics. In order to get into this material a little bit, we need to know, first, we need to have some shared vocabulary. So let's talk first about what we mean by cognition. We're talking about cognitive aging tonight. Cognition is what happens between perception of the world and action in the world. It's all the things that happen in between. Things like modulating attention, things like language and perception of space, things like speed of information processing. And one of the most important aspects of cognition is memory. Learning and memory in particular. Why is memory so important? Well, it's important because it's one of the #1 areas that experiences declines in both normal aging and pathological aging. So it's particularly of interest to neuropsychologists like me and other clinicians who study Alzheimer's disease. In order to introduce you to this learning and memory content, I want to demonstrate a cognitive assessment. This is just for educational purposes. I'm not testing you. But I do want you to remember some words, okay? Just remember some words. This is what neuropsychologists love to do. They love to test me. Okay, remember these words. Don't say them out loud. Just house, jacket, dog, car, lemon. Okay, take a moment. Remember those to yourself. And hold on to them for later for me. Lots of changes occur in cognitive function that are normal, that occur in normal aging. These are things like forgetfulness. Forgetfulness can be normal. These are things like increasingly relying on notes or other types of reminders, including reminders from a family member or spouse. Forgetting where we leave things is a common complaint, especially keys. I've displayed here on the screen a few areas that are most typical of normal cognitive aging. Declines in speed of information processing, multitasking, the ability to shift between two or more simultaneous foci of attention, the ability to find the word you're looking for, which we call that tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's right there, but I can't quite access it. That's a part of normal aging. And then some aspects of memory decline are normal. So let's get into what I mean by some aspects. The course of normal cognitive aging, you may be surprised to know, involves a rather early change. As soon as you reach the 30s, the fourth decade, your 30s are when things start to decline in these areas that we've just been talking about. And then there is a progressive, steady decline into older age. People start to notice these things later than the 30s. They don't typically have first complaints of normal aging in the 30s. But by the 50s and the 60s, people start to notice these types of things. We distinguish, or we differentiate normal aging from pathological aging, which encompasses both a phase called mild cognitive impairment and a phase called dementia. I'll say more about these things as we go along, but I just want you to have the basic vocabulary so far. You can see in this cartoon plot that the major difference between normal aging and pathological aging is the rate of decline. And the major difference between a mild cognitive impairment and a dementia is some threshold of decline below which certain things become more problematic for people. So we'll talk about these specific areas as we go. But I do want to bring us back to the different types of memory. I mentioned earlier that some forms of memory decline are normal. We can think about memory as involving these three components. First component being encoding, which is, if you think about a metaphor of a filing cabinet, when documents are placed into the filing cabinet or information out in the world is processed in the brain, we call that encoding. The second phase is that information has to be stored. The filing cabinet has to have good integrity. Maybe it's locked or maybe it's labeled in a certain way so that the information can be located later. And rounding out that filing cabinet metaphor, retrieval is the third and final process. This is when we go back to the filing cabinet. Can we get the information that we initially put in there? That's retrieval. So, help me out here. Can anyone recall the words that we started with, the words that I presented in the beginning? I'm hearing some of them. Okay, good. I'm hearing some of them. The process that you just went through to go get those words relied on it relied on all aspects of that memory schematic that I presented, but two in particular. The first factor was your ability to retrieve, so your ability to go back to the cabinet. The second was your encoding up front. Maybe you weren't quite into the talk yet, you weren't really paying attention when I presented those words. If they weren't encoded in the first place, there's no way they're coming out later. So normal aging, some people who had difficulty with that task and may be experiencing difficulty in one of those two areas. The other area, storage, is tested in a slightly different way. To find out whether the information was stored, I'll give you hints. So one of the words was an animal. You don't have to say the words out loud. One was an article of clothing, a vehicle, fruit, a dwelling. Now it's a little bit easier once I've provided a hint, because I'm helping you get into your storage. Okay? I can make it even easier by asking you to select from a set of words, right? Okay, so I know you guys had these. House, you knew jacket was on there. Car was on there. Lemon was on there. Dog was on there. Okay. So that test was to test storage. Okay, so when you're able to successfully perform the task with the queuing, you know that the information was stored. In cases of dementia of the Alzheimer's type, and some other types of dementia, the storage element is the part of the memory system that has gone awry. Okay? Let's define dementia. Let's get on the same page here. We have to keep the vocabulary. So dementia is two things. Okay? First, it's a decline in cognitive ability from some previous level. So if someone is born with a relatively low level of cognitive ability, and later we measure their ability and it's still low at that same level, that's not dementia. Okay? It has to involve a decline. And the second piece is that the cognitive deficits, these changes in cognition, like memory changes, confer some type of interference in daily functioning. Okay? So those are the two parts. Change from previous affects daily functioning. So this is things like when those cognitive problems start to affect one's ability to pay the bills, remember to sort through how to write a check, manage medications, if someone has a series of medications to take at different times. Okay? So that's what dementia is. But dementia is an umbrella term which encompasses a number of different types of pathologies. Here I've listed just a few. You may have heard of some of these pathologies. Alzheimer's disease, I'm guessing some of you have heard of. Vascular disease or avascular dementia. Parkinson's disease. A lot of people don't know that Parkinson's disease, in addition to being a movement disorder, can also involve a dementia. Frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, and other less common dementias. We're going to talk primarily today about the most common type of dementing pathology, which is Alzheimer's disease. Why are we going to speak about this? Well, Alzheimer's disproportionately affects our communities. We've all known people who have Alzheimer's disease because it's the most common type of dementia. But it's just that. It's one type of the illnesses that cause dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is that type of dementia which primarily affects the storage system. That's one of the things that differentiates it from normal memory, aging of the normal memory system. So a lot of people come to our office and say, listen, I'm forgetting things much more than I used to. Much harder for me to keep track of my appointments. I'm worried that I have Alzheimer's disease. Well, it is possible, especially as we get older, the rate of Alzheimer's disease increases. It is possible. It's also possible that those memory problems could represent normal changes in the memory system. And so that's why we do a comprehensive evaluation to sort out what type of memory problem is happening for that person. I said before, we're speaking about Alzheimer's disease tonight because it is such a public health crisis for us. The rate of Alzheimer's disease doubles every 5 years after one reaches the age of 65. It's affecting 30 to 50%, depending on the estimates you look at, of people who are over 85 in the oldest old age group. We're estimating that by 2050, 125 million people will have dementia. There's a disproportionate impact on women. Research is ongoing to sort this out a little bit more, but we do have some insights about why that is. And Alzheimer's disease care and treatment costs is over and above the cost of cancer and heart disease. So this is rapidly becoming the crisis of our time in the health world. The other reason we're talking about Alzheimer's tonight is because the current treatments that we know of are not good enough. The current treatments we have are able to delay progression of symptoms, but they do not prevent or halt the disease. They do not prevent or halt the disease. We do not have a cure for Alzheimer's disease. I've listed these drugs here on the screen for those who are particularly interested in this area. You may have heard of some of these medicines. There are two classes of medicines currently approved for treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And when I say treatment, I mean delaying progression of the symptoms, right? Not halting the disease entirely. And they include the cholinesterase inhibitors. You may have heard of Aricept. It's one of the most popular in that category. And the glutamate antagonists. We only have one member of that category, Namenda. You may have heard of that. Both are prescribed to many folks with Alzheimer's disease. I am not a physician, so I won't tell you what the indications or side effects are for these medications. That's not my area of expertise. But what we do know is, unfortunately, that these drugs are not enough. So, let's step back in time for a quick moment to do the academic piece of this. We have to remember where we came from, and we have to give some credit to the amount of progress that has been made over the past century. Dr. Alzheimer first characterized what later became known as Alzheimer's disease, what he called senile dementia, in the early 20th century. He followed a single case study, actually. We get our initial information about Alzheimer's disease from a single case study of a relatively young woman in her 50s who developed a senile dementia. After her death, her neuropathology, the brain was examined on neuropathology. Two types of unusual protein formations were found in the brain. And this is where we get a huge piece of the launch pad for our research efforts over the past century. Dr. Alzheimer characterized beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles, tau neurofibrillary tangles. These two proteinopathies, problems with proteins, define, to this day, what Alzheimer's disease is. In Alzheimer's day, in the early 20th century, this was the best that could be done for diagnosis, post-mortem pathology. Today, fast forward a century, we have live imaging of these proteinopathies. Using positron emission tomography, we can image these aberrant proteins in the living human being, which is a huge diagnostic piece of progress. You can see here in this schematic that we've adapted from another author, the difference between a normal brain and a brain with Alzheimer's disease. The top row shows you imaging of the abnormal tau, and the bottom line shows you imaging of the abnormal amyloid. And what you should take away from the schematic is that the the more color, the more distance away from the blue end of the spectrum, the more disease is in the brain. Okay? We can talk later about the pattern of accumulation, which is also interesting. We at the Butler Hospital Memory and Aging Program have a number of people to thank for participating in our research, but more importantly, moving the field of Alzheimer's disease forward. Jim and Dell Kelly participated in the initial studies that allowed us to use PET imaging to detect amyloid in the live brain. And they did that right at our program at Butler. Without the sacrifices and contributions of people like these folks, we wouldn't have the imaging technologies that we have now to help detect Alzheimer's disease earlier and earlier. You may know that the reason Alzheimer's disease is a progressive illness, meaning it gets worse, is because these proteinopathies spread throughout the brain. They initially deposit in certain areas and then across the years spread to other aspects of the brain. And the cognitive symptoms, the problems that result, are directly related to the parts of the brain affected by these proteinopathies. Let me show you this very interesting video. There's a certain type of Alzheimer's disease that you may have heard of, which is called dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease. It's a very, very rare type of Alzheimer's that affects people younger than 60. Dominantly inherited means that if your parent has it, you will have it. And because of the research participation of families with dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease, the scientists have been able to characterize the rate of progression, the changes in the deposition of these proteins in the brain. So what we'll see in this video, we're starting at minus 25 years to the onset of Alzheimer's dementia. And we're going to look at a person's brain. We're able to predict when their onset of dementia will be based on their parents' onset of dementia. So we're predicting 25 years from this time point, this person will start expressing symptoms. And we're going to watch the amyloid accumulate over time in this video. Okay, here we go. You can see on the color scale as we move from purple end of the spectrum towards the red end of the spectrum through blue and green, more and more amyloid pathology is depositing in the brain. But we're still 7 years out from a diagnosis, still 4 years out from a clinical dementia syndrome, and now we've hit the 0 mark, crossing through. Now we're 4 years after the diagnosis, 6 years, 7 years. So you can see how it progresses through the brain. The important thing to take away here is that 15 to 20 years prior to the onset of the clinical diagnosis, this proteinopathy was already present and spreading in the brain. So this type of research heralded a new era of Alzheimer's disease research, that instead of focusing on the period of the clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's dementia, we needed to walk back the clock and focus on these prodromal syndrome, these prodromal clinical phases. A lot of research went into characterizing mild cognitive impairment when symptoms were present, but functional impairment, bill payment and medication payment and independence functions were not yet impaired. But we had to walk back the clock even further if we have a chance of really intervening in an illness that is showing its biologic markers at least 15 years before those things are happening. So that is where we've landed today, in this preclinical Alzheimer's disease world. I want to share just a brief note about a gene that confers risk for Alzheimer's disease. I spoke earlier about an inherited syndrome, dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease. dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease is a genetic type of Alzheimer's disease, but it's separate from what we're about to discuss. That type, that dominantly inherited type, is exceedingly rare, and a person doesn't have it unless their parent had that type, that rare type. So the gene that we're going to talk about right now is a gene that confers risk for Alzheimer's disease, but does not tell you whether you will get Alzheimer's disease. There's a difference between increasing risk and diagnostic certainty, okay? The gene is called Apoe, apolipoprotein E. There's a few different flavors of this gene, a few different types, okay? You can have epsilon 2, you can have epsilon 3, you can have epsilon 4. And like all of your genes, you have 2 copies, one from mom, one from dad. So you could have 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, all the different combinations. The epsilon 4 variant is the one that confers increased risk. So if you take, you probably can't read this in the back, this is really small, but this chart plots the approximate lifetime risk of Alzheimer's disease based on the genotype you have. So this very, very low risk area is people with 2 copies of the epsilon 2 or a copy of E2 and E3. Then we have epsilon 3, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. So what you can glean from this chart is that having 1 copy of the epsilon 4 variant is what increases someone's risk. Having 2 copies of it does increase your risk even a little bit more than that, okay? The normal, the quote-unquote normal variant is epsilon 3. So most of us in this room have 3, 3, as it turns out. I wanted to share this with you because this has been a part of the effort to identify cases of Alzheimer's disease long before they develop Alzheimer's dementia. So research studies, for example, have sometimes recruited individuals who have that increased risk so that we can learn more about what happens before the onset of dementia. But again, having a 4-4 does not mean that you will have Alzheimer's disease. It simply means that your risk relative to the normal population is higher. Oh, here's a nice picture of our group at Butler. I forgot that I put this in here. The reason I put this in here was because I wanted to share with you the new efforts that are ongoing in our program to combat Alzheimer's disease and move the science forward to the point where we can intervene early. Dr. Salloway and the rest of the program have really built quite a research and clinical operation. Worldwide, our memory aging program is a top 10 center for clinical research in Alzheimer's disease. We've been involved in a number of advances in the field recently, and we have many, many clinical trials that participants are involved in. And we really thank them for being the ones to help move this science forward. Let me talk quickly about a few types of new research that's on the horizon for us. Things to keep your ears open for. New promises in the advancement of the science. As we look at screening tools that may be viable for predicting later development of Alzheimer's disease, people have turned to blood-based biomarkers. Blood is very easy to collect. It's less uncomfortable than having a brain imaging, a lot less uncomfortable than having a spinal tap, and other ways of collecting samples. So right now, as the science stands, there is strong evidence for what's called neurofilament light polypeptide, which is one potential biomarker to predict Alzheimer's disease. There's promising evidence for amyloid in the blood, although this is still being worked out. And tau, the other aberrant protein in Alzheimer's disease, more work is also needed in that area to get these blood biomarkers off the ground. research is ongoing. Another area that we're interested in at the Memory and Aging program at Butler is retinal imaging. The eye, as you may know, is sort of a window into the brain. In fact, the retina, that particular tissue on the back of the eye, is a specialized type of brain tissue that we can observe without any invasive procedures at all. It's just like going to your eye doctor. They don't do any particularly invasive procedures. They just use special imaging techniques that are non-invasive. And so the point here is that amyloid deposits in the brain and it deposits in the retina. And so if we can detect that amyloid earlier in the retina, that may be of interest going forward. The last thing to mention briefly for you is the move towards the anti-tau clinical trials. You may have heard that we've been extremely disappointed in a number of failed amyloid trials. There have been several drugs that have attempted to clear amyloid from the brain, that the trials have had to be stopped for one reason or another, primarily because they're not showing efficacy at reducing the spread of Alzheimer's disease. Tau, that other protein besides amyloid that's atypical or abnormal in Alzheimer's disease, is more closely associated with the neurodegeneration, the loss of brain cells that is involved in Alzheimer's disease. So it's thought that targeting tau may help protect against the advancement of the disease. The reason people started with amyloid was because amyloid deposition occurs earlier. So it was the natural first target. Turning to tau does seem to be promising, though, and we've got a number of those trials going on. Okay, I've said enough about the science and about the problem at hand. Let me turn it over to my colleague Tara Tang, who can help us understand what we can do about this, how we can intervene.
Everyone still with us? Okay, I know that's a lot of information. I do promise we'll have an opportunity for question and answers a little bit afterwards. My piece, I will do my best to keep it brief, I understand, and between you and perhaps dinner. So I do appreciate that. So what can we do about this right now? And just so everyone is aware, my role is I'm part of the outreach team at the Memory and Aging program, so responsible for speaking to organizing events like this with individuals and among other things as well, getting out in the community and promoting everything that we're doing. So some general ideas that we can speak about, what you can do now. So we're going to talk briefly about how you can keep your heart healthy, which is also convenient because it will help, in theory, to also keep your brain healthy. So there's a correlation between the two. We're going to talk briefly also about a prevention registry. Dr. Castelluccio alluded to that we're moving everything sooner instead of waiting until we see symptoms. The research and the things that we're doing now, we need to go sooner. One of those ways that we can identify people who might be part of that category is to have a prevention registry. So I'll speak about that. Of course, in theory, also, if you're interested in the registry, perhaps maybe participating in a research study might be something that fits your lifestyle. And that's how one way people can transform any fear that they do have about this disease and turning it into action, positive, forward-thinking action, which is what really is going to be what moves this disease forward and out of our lives. After today, what we like to say is we want you all to take the Alzheimer's Challenge. Anything that you hear tonight that you found helpful and useful, we want you to tell 5 of your closest friends and your family so you can have a very proactive discussion about next steps that you can take together as a family or within your friends. There's also, you can volunteer in many different capacities, not only at our site, but out in your community as well. And then, of course, there's always the effort to raise money for Alzheimer's research. Unfortunately, none of this comes cheap, so we are always looking for opportunities for that. Our group actually participated in the Walk to End Alzheimer's yesterday, so that is our group, and that's one of the ways we like to get out into the community, share the information, but also give back and support all the wonderful work that the Alzheimer's Association does here in Rhode Island and Southern Massachusetts. So we mentioned before something about keeping your heart healthy, so that you can keep your brain healthy. And many of you, I'm sure, already do some of these. I do admit that I feel a little bad sometimes because I don't do some of these very well all the time, but the effort is there. So one of the first things, of course, is staying active. Down here, it's beautiful trails, beautiful countryside, and you have the ocean right here. So that's one, participating in any activities that would get you outside and do things like that. That's a great way, keeping yourself active. Eating well, things that your mom told you, your grandmother told you. We're also seeing that leaning towards a Mediterranean-style diet may also be helpful and protective. So, you know, the olive oils, the healthy fishes, the good nuts, things of that nature. So if that, whatever is doing well for you, that would be part of that. Sleeping well, I don't do that well. But getting the proper amount of sleep on a regular basis, right? You know how you feel when you have a short night, a bad night for whatever reason. You wake up the next day, you're feeling groggy, you're not on your game, you're not on your point. So this is an opportunity during your sleep time as well to help kind of reset your brain, potentially, and Brian, I think you can say that, is that clearing out potentially some of that normal amyloid that is building up as well. But sleeping is just resetting your brain, right? Making sure everything is top notch. Exercising your brain, so mentally, mental activities. Things maybe stretching your brain, maybe participating in an activity that you normally wouldn't do. And that could be as simple as maybe going to see a different genre of movie than you normally would, you know, see. Having a discussion about a topic perhaps that you don't agree with. Not to the point of raising your heart levels too much, but expanding the brain, expanding the perspective. Those would be things that would be helpful. In addition to, you know, your regular Sudokus and your brain things, but also being careful that if you're very good at Sudoku, maybe because you're really good at doing that particular style, kick it up a notch. Do something a little bit different so that your brain doesn't get too used to it, right? It's like when you exercise in the gym. If you're constantly doing weight reps for your biceps or triceps, then if you get really good at that point, but then you need to work the other muscle groups in your body as well. Same concept. Connecting with family and friends that you like. As we are coming into the holiday season, it's important to stay connected with the people that energize you, that make you feel good, you know, and also having those different conversations that maybe you haven't had with that individual in a while. That's another great way to keep your brain active, keep you happy, right? And dairy as well, to make sure that, you know, you're getting the right stimuli in that regard. Relax and reduce stress, also something important to keep in mind as we start heading into the holidays. So doing that yoga, the stretches, the walk, listening to music, whatever relaxes you and can calm you down, you should make sure that you make time to do that for yourself. That's an important thing. You can do it together as a family or with your best friends or whatnot. I know that some people, we see mall walkers, as the weather gets a little bit colder, you see them power walking right on through and they look like they're having a great time. So whatever, again, literally float your boat to go out and enjoy yourself and relax. Those are going to be great. You also want to control your risk factors. So if you have high cholesterol, diabetes, anything that is off and is not in its normal range for you, you want to make sure you speak with your primary care physician about that so that those can be addressed and those don't exacerbate any sort of memory issues you potentially could have. So you want to keep those in mind, going to the doctor on a regular basis, making those appointments, things of that nature. And then, of course, getting involved in research. After all of this, you hear about it, you think about it, you talk about it with your loved ones. Getting involved in research, of course, is one way to move this field forward with your experiences. So it's something, it's all part of like these 8 pillars of good brain health. Okay? Do you think y'all can do some of these? I think you can. I think you can. All right, and I mentioned getting evaluated. It's extremely important, not only from a medical standpoint, you know, with making sure that your cholesterol numbers are right and things of that nature, but if you are concerned about your memory loss and whatnot, it's really good to get a baseline, so comparing yourself to yourself, right? So get a neuropsychological evaluation with someone like Dr. Castelluccio, and then maybe in a couple years, take a look at it again and see if there's any change. So he had mentioned earlier, if there's a significant change in baseline, then that might be something to look at a little bit further and examine if there might be some Alzheimer's or early stages and to see what you can do about it. All of that is important because it's going to give you more time to plan for the future. Have control, take things, do things the way you want to do them, get things organized the way you want to do it before there are any potential issues. So that way you have control over the situation, you're not giving it over to someone, even if it is within your family, you can make sure that everything is set up the way you want it, right? And then absolutely, just as important, is receiving the support for yourself as well as for your loved ones. This is a disease that affects the entire family, it's not just one person, and it's a long disease. I think some of you have talked to a little bit beforehand and perhaps know firsthand as well. This is a long disease, it's not just one and done and over with, 15, 20 years down the line. That's a long time and a long burden on a family. So it's extremely important that everyone has the right support, especially the primary caregivers. There's caregiver exhaustion, and that's a real thing, to make sure that they have everything that they need to go forward and care for themselves so that they don't get sick and then still be able to provide optimal care for the person who has the disease as well. Does that make all sense? So I mentioned earlier we have the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry. We started an initiative this year, back in May, on Advocacy Day in Providence at the Capitol. And our goal is to get 2,020 people into our registry by 2020. As of this afternoon, we only need 300. So I am hoping that all of you tonight will be able to help us in this way. And this is one way to move that research forward, to get involved. It does not mean you are going to jump into a clinical trial, but it does say, I am interested in learning more about what the program does, what our program does, what's being done in the field, and it's a great way to open up a conversation between you and your loved ones and our clinicians so that we can help you figure out maybe what might be a good track for you to take and provide you with the information so you can make an informed decision. And that's really important. We want to make sure it's whatever decision you make, it's the right decision for you, okay? The registry also has the added benefit of chances, if there is anything big happening in the field, if there is a brand new study coming up that could be very beneficial to the population, the registry people are going to hear about it first, okay? That's going to be one of those breaking news sort of emails that you would get. We are very cognizant of your time and your email inbox. We don't want to just bombard you with random and superfluous information. We want to give you meaningful information. So this would be one way to kind of have that entry into that. The Lieutenant Governor was kind enough to help Dr. Salloway kick off the campaign. And so there is an opportunity tonight, if you wish to sign up or get started, that I can help you in the back afterwards. Okay? And then the registry as well, this is for people 40 to 85 years old. You can be cognitively normal, you can have mild cognitive impairment, and even early Alzheimer's disease. So it really does reach a wide range of people. So the more people that join, we hope the better. That's going to prepare us to bring forth new information. And for those who are interested in research, it's that gateway into it. I'm hopeful that we're going to have some very, very exciting studies coming up, that we will be able to share more information with you really soon. This registry is going to be the best way to hear about that and get involved sooner than later, again, if that's the choice that you wish to make, and a good way to just have a conversation with the outreach team and our clinicians. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and what's exciting, and this is actually a little early, but we just got our own page. We are no longer a group associated with Butler Hospital, but we have our own memory and aging program page. So that makes it much easier to communicate with you all, to talk about different events, upcoming activities, and whatnot. So I know that may not seem like a huge deal for all of you, but I am super excited about this. I am very excited about this. And of course, our memory and aging program website has information about our team, about the research that we're doing, general FAQs and whatnot about the disease and how to reach us